Hi, and welcome to Chapter 2, Introducing Universal Design for Learning. Again, remember that's UDL, Universal Design for Learning. Our objectives for this is that by the end of the chapter, we should be able to define the term universal design. We should be able to explain what universal design for learning, UDL, is and how it evolved. We should be able to discuss the three essential qualities of UDL. We should be able to compare and contrast UDL and differentiated instruction. So the term universal design actually came from the field of architectural studies, a subject near and dear to my heart as a STEM teacher, at the Center for Universal Design at Raleigh, North Carolina in 2008. And that's you started seeing it kind of being dabbled with in education, and then it kind of disappeared, and now it's back. Ron Mace advocated that if an accessible design is created, time and money would be saved in the long run, right? Because it's accessible and people with disabilities would benefit from that accessibility. And so he was really the one that said that that's why we needed to do this. So there's 7 different principles for universal design. Think equitable use. When you land on our homepage of our course, you can see something about equity, right? And it's about that everybody can see over the fence because they're giving the tools to be able to see over the fence. Think back to last chapter when I was talking about my student in biology class that was in a wheelchair and he couldn't reach the lab table. Well, we just had to make a shorter table, right? Because then he could actually have the same abilities as his non-disabled peers because he had the tools that he needed to do that. It needs to be flexible, that when we use it, there's flexibility in how we use it. It needs to be simple and intuitive to use. If it's complicated and you can't figure it out, then that does no good, right? If someone can't figure it out, that doesn't make it equitable because they haven't figured out how to even use it. Perceptible information. It needs to be perceptible. The tolerance for error. So what they're saying is think about a traditional light switch that looks like a little knob almost. You have to have your finger on that knob, right? And so if you have motor dysfunctions, the rocker switches that are on the light switches, those are easier, right? Because you can hit those in a variety of places and still turn the light on or off. But that little knob takes more fine motor skills. That's what they're talking about with tolerance for error. Low physical effort. It shouldn't be something hard to do. It shouldn't take a whole bunch of strength, right? Our disabled people typically, not always, typically strength can be an issue. And so we want to make sure it's low physical effort. And then size and space for the approach and use. So if you have a rocker switch on a light that's designed for a disabled person, you have to be able to have the wheelchair get up to it, right? Or you have to be able to allow a person to get up to it. They shouldn't have to reach real high or reach around things, things of that nature. So that approach to the actual item and the use of it should be accessible. They should have size and space. Universal design has many applications in society. Think about our everyday household items. We have alarm clocks that have large numerals, and as I'm getting older, and I used to make fun of my husband who's older than I am, and when he couldn't read and he was like holding something out at arm's length, that's very real, and I feel bad that I ever made fun of him because I can't see anything anymore, and so those large numerals are very helpful. Touch lamps, the lamps where you can touch them just about anywhere and they turn on. That's a universal design. Cars with accessibility options. So handicap fans that can be driven. Those are considered universal design. Traffic signals that beep at you so that if you're blind, you don't have to, or you're colorblind, you aren't dependent on seeing the color. It's beeping at you. Or the sign that says walk, right? Have you been at those at a crosswalk and you've hit the walk button and the walk person on the sign comes on, but it also says walk, walk, walk. That's what they're talking about. Manuals in multiple languages. So when you get an instruction manual, it's in multiple common languages that we might have here. Or a personal digital assistant. Those are all universal design applications. In the classroom, we see universal design in different ways. We keep those 7 principles of UDL in mind, remember that we just saw, as we explore ways to plan up front for each and every learner in our classrooms. That learner's not an afterthought. We think about them at the beginning, and we figure out what we're going to do to make sure that they're successful. A classroom website offers equitable use because it can be accessed at home, in a hospital, or elsewhere for students who can't physically be in class. That's what I love about an LMS, and there are a bunch of LMSs out there, and I like some more than others. But LMSs are awesome because even if the kid is absent from class because they're somewhere else or they are at a hospital, for whatever reason, if they're not in class, I can upload my lecture. I can give them all the materials they need for that class, and they have access to it on an LMS. To offer flexibility, reading materials should be available in hard copy, digital, and Braille formats. If you have a visually impaired student, you need to make sure you have Braille materials. But I always had, some people need hard copies of textbooks. So that's why even though we've gone digital in a lot of ways, most schools will still have hard copies of books. Materials, charts, equipment that are in the classroom are labeled with words, pictures, symbols for simple and intuitive use. If you go into a chemistry classroom and you see things that are flammable, they're also marked with like a picture of flames, right? Because when we look at that, we go, oh, that must be flammable. Even if I can't read the word, if I'm not an English speaker, or if I just can't read, I know that the fire means fire, and that's danger, right? So we want to make sure that we have things that are simple and intuitive to use. Information should be perceptible for more learners when the closed caption feature is added to a video. I used to never do this until I got older, and I think back and go, gosh, I should have done this all along. As we get older, we get harder of hearing, right? And so when I watch videos, I normally have the closed captions on. Well, now in my classroom, I turn those on because then the people that are further back from the projector, they can actually see the words, so that's easier for them to understand. Computer software or peer tutors that guide the user when incorrect responses are made can provide that tolerance for error. If you've ever had a software program that says, make sure you click here, and then when you don't click here, it comes up again and says, no, you mean you should have clicked here. Or if you skip something when you're filling out an application online and it boots you back to the application, but what you missed is highlighted in red. Those are things that help you with that tolerance for error. An alternative computer keyboard or touchscreen monitor can help someone with motor challenges respond more efficiently and comfortable with low physical effort. Some people have a hard time typing on a keyboard because of their fine motor skills. And so if they have a touchscreen, that's easier for them to access. And so again, that's universal design. There's enough space and room for personal assistants or assistive devices to work harmoniously in the classroom. Tables and chair heights may be adjusted for students of different sizes. For a long time, we had these little tiny chairs. And not even an obese student, but my big football player student was so uncomfortable in that chair, right? So we need to make sure we have chairs that access all sizes. That's why you don't see as much of the, when I was in school, your desk and your chair were attached. And so if you were a larger person, you didn't fit in there very well, right? Most of the time now you see a chair and a desk separate, and that's because of universal design. School systems benefit from looking at teaching and learning in the same way that MACE looked at making buildings accessible. We want to reflect and support findings that in brain-based research, recognition systems, strategic systems, and effective systems. We want to make sure that we're looking at all three of those. So in our recognition networks, the what of learning, that's what, right? That's how we gather our facts, how we categorize what we see, what we hear, what we read. We identify letters, words, or an author's style and recognition task, and you can see the part of the brain that the recognition network works in. In your strategic networks, that's more of the front part of your brain. It's the how of learning, planning and performing your tasks, how we organize, how we express our ideas, how we write an essay or solve a math problem, because those are strategic tasks, and how we go about doing it. And then our effective learning, that's kind of that inner part of the brain. It's the why of learning, how learners become interested, how we engage them, how we keep them motivated. Persisting through challenges and applying those self-regulation skills reflect effective dimensions. And we see that we're working more on that, especially with our COVID kids, about how to apply that grit and how to make sure that they learn that resiliency. So we have cognitive social learning theories, we have the zone of proximal development, we have Piaget's stages of development, we have Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. We have multiple intelligences, and then we have learning preferences. So when we look at different developments of teaching and learning, we have 4 general approaches. We have visual or verbal, and those characteristics, they prefer to receive visual information paired with print. I'm a very visual person. If you don't provide me something in print, you just talk to me, I will swear up and down that you never told it to me, even though you probably did. But if I don't see it in writing, and I tell my students know that, they're like, no, you have to write it down, miss. You have to put it on the Post-it note. You have to do this. I have to see it in print, and they know that. I tell kids upright about my styles, and I said, if you tell me something, it probably never happened, and I will swear that it never happened, even though it probably did. It's just that's how my brain works. So if you don't write it down for me, just know that I will say it probably never happened. It's okay to be honest with your kids about your learning style. Visual people, they visualize that information that they're going to learn, and they normally like to study in a quiet room. That's the only thing that's not right for me. I like to have background noise, but it can't be something I'm interested in. Like a lot of times when I'm studying or when I'm working on something, I'll have The Office playing in the background because it's episodes that I've seen 16,000 times, it feels like. So I won't really pay attention, but I need that noise. My learning tools are lecturing with presentation slides, showing software, multimedias, textbooks, class notes, outlines. Then you have your tactile kinesthetic learners. They prefer that hands-on learning. They're active. They learn through physical movement teaching. They're the kid that you have to have them up and moving, right? They can't just sit in a chair and learn. They have to be up. Their tools are demonstration teaching, those field experiences, doing the activities, right? Those projects. That's the kid that you're really targeting for that. You have visual nonverbal learners. They prefer the information presented visually, just like the visual verbals. They may be more artistic. I'm not artistic. I am so envious of those that are, but I am not. They tend to prefer that quiet room rather than a study group, and they use pictures to remember. So they'll make pictures a lot. They're the kids you'll see drawing pictures in their notes because they're associating that picture with what they learned. They need the visual aids. They need videos. They need maps. They need charts, diagrams, pictures, film. They need all that stuff in order to cement that learning. Auditory and verbal learners, they prefer listening to the lecture. They don't necessarily need to see anything. They can listen and get it. They learn best through interactions with others. They're very social. They exchange ideas. We know, even with all the styles, that learning is social. You learn something by teaching it. And so the more you can have kids think, pair, share, turn to your elbow partner, tell a friend, all of those things, you cement that learning. And so that social learning piece is really important with them. They use what is heard to remember, and they may repeat information out loud. I do that. When I'm looking at something that's really important, I'll start saying it out loud. Even though I'm visual verbal, it's that verbal piece of me. It's that verbal piece of the auditory. They like group discussions. They like analog or digital recordings. Remember, you have 3 essential qualities of UDL. You need multiple means of representation. So how you're representing the material, multiple means of engagement, how the learner is interacting with the learning. Are they writing? Are they telling? Are they doing? And multiple means of action and expression. So you need all of those are the 3 essential qualities of universal design of learning. So let's talk about those qualities. So the multiple means of representation. When we look at that what of learning, they offer flexibility in ways of presenting the information, receiving the information, interpreting the content. They customize the display of the information, adapting for different languages, different symbols, mathematical expressions, all the things you can do to make sure that you've represented the materials as many ways as you can. And then we have the means of action and expression, that how of learning. It offers flexibilities and ways of providing that physical action, options to accommodate preferred means of control, so the tools, the assistive technologies that you're using. It provides choices in how students communicate and how they respond to the information. And then you want multiple means of engagement, the why of learning. So adjusting for student interest, for cultural backgrounds, for relevance, for providing student choice. Sustaining effort and persistence, highlighting goals, varying demands, resources, mastery-oriented feedback, all of those things. Again, back with representation, we have to offer flexibility in ways of adjusting the complexity of material presented, so customizing. And then providing options for comprehension, so that background knowledge, building connections, guiding our information processing for the students. Multiple means of actions and expression. We are using the different cognitive strategic systems that promote executive functioning, goal setting, we're planning, we're strategy development, managing and processing the information, and we're monitoring progress of students. We're identifying areas of strengths and needs. When I do projects, I have what's called workshops. So if some kids may not need any help on something, but some may. So those kids I pull and I give them little mini lessons on how to do something. And that's helping with those needs, right? I've seen that some kids have those strengths. So the needs, I'm making sure that they have what they need in order to go on, because they have a deficit there. The why of learning, that means of engagement, creating the safe collaborative environment using resources in the school community. Kids will not share if they don't think it's safe. And so that is something I spend the first week of school on every single time, is building that classroom culture. We do a behavioral contract, and it's how you want the teacher to treat you, how you're going to treat the teacher, and how you want to treat each other, and then how we are going to handle problems in our classroom. The kids always say the same thing, but they think they have all this ownership because they are contributing to the rules. But I want to make sure kids know they can speak up, and that they aren't going to be ridiculed, they're not going to be made fun of, that their opinion is valid also. And we're developing self-regulation skills to increase motivation, personal coping skills, strategies, self-assessment, and reflection. Then you have UDL and differentiated instruction. They aren't the same. Differentiated instruction is an instructional process that offers teachers flexibility in the ways they meet the needs of individual learners. It's like UDL, because differentiated instruction first considers the strengths and needs for the individual within a classroom setting. And you have three basic components of differentiated instruction. You have content, process, and product. So it even kind of sounds the same. So instead of multiple means of representation under UDL, in differentiated instruction, we're talking about content. We're talking what the teacher plans to teach, the concepts, the principles, the generalization, the skills, the attitudes. Instead of multiple means of action and expression under UDL, we're looking at the product, how students are going to respond to the information presented, and how the students will be assessed. And under multiple means of engagement, under differentiated instruction, we're looking at process, why the teacher chooses a method, strategy, or approach to teach content or skills to a given set of learners. Okay, so that concludes this lecture. It was super quick. I will post your quiz for Chapter 2 by Monday night. Again, it won't be the one in the textbook unless they get access for everybody by tomorrow. And so that's why I'm kind of waiting on the quiz to see if we can get it through the textbook so it will auto-grade and do all the things you would probably like it to do. Otherwise, I can load a quiz, but I just wanted to make sure that you saw it. Again, if you ever have any questions, concerns, anything like that, please, please, please reach out to me. I am happy to help. I'm available via text, email, anything like that. But I want to make sure you understand. You also want to start getting chapter or hour 1 of your observations done and uploaded. Let me know if you have questions about that, and I will see you later.